Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a cold, sterile glow on the folding tables. The air smelled like reheated cheese and burnt coffee. Someone had laid out aluminum trays of lasagna, their corners crusted and dry. Cookie platters from Costco sat untouched next to a row of styrofoam cups half filled with weak, lukewarm brew. I stepped in quiet, late. No one noticed. Or maybe they did, and turned back just as quickly. My Walmart thermos sweated in my hand. I hadn't bothered changing. Faded jeans. Fleece jacket with a stitched mic, facilities tech patch over the chest. Everyone else wore black or navy. Ties, pearls. One man even had a pocket square. The low murmur of organ music filtered from a speaker in the ceiling. Plastic forks scraped paper plates. Conversations floated like smoke, mostly whispers. I hovered near the back, beside the bulletin board pinned with photos from last summer's church fair. My name wasn't on any of them. Brad stood near the front, in a golf blazer the color of sunburn. Loud, laughing. A glass of sweet tea in his hand like it was bourbon at a wedding. His voice carried. Fake grief never looked so polished. Tessa fluttered beside him, pouring drinks like a hostess at a country club mixer. Someone near the buffet line whispered. He said, "Didn't Mike used to fix vending machines?" Another voice replied, "Still does, I think. At Walmart or something." I got in line behind a woman I didn't recognize. Took a paper plate, slid a square of lasagna onto it. The cheese peeled back like old wallpaper. A cookie crumbled as I picked it up. I sat near the kitchen door. Alone. Chair wobbled with a click each time I shifted. The plastic cover on the table was already stained from spilled ranch. I looked up briefly. Nobody looked back. That's when I saw it. By the exit, on a coat rack, something familiar hung. Dark brown. Faded at the elbows. The same corduroy jacket Dad used to wear when he cleaned the gutters. Still smelled faintly of tobacco and winter air. It shouldn't have been there. Tessa had cleared everything out days ago. I stood slowly. Walked over, pretending to check the exit. My fingers slipped into the coat pocket. Something warm. Worn. I knew the feel before I pulled it out. Dad's checkbook. Leather, creased in the middle. The one he always kept in the drawer by the garage calendar. I slid it into my jacket. No one saw. No one cared. Brad's voice, echoing in a tiled courthouse hallway. He screamed, "That house was mine." Then a gavel. A calm voice replied, "The title never passed to you." Back in the hall, a fork tapped glass. Brad stood, cleared his throat, raised the tea like a champagne toast. He said, "Quick update. For those asking, yes, Dad adjusted the will. Just making sure we're all clear." Tessa smiled. "Too quick. Too tight." She said, "It was his choice. Mike wasn't listed. There's no confusion." A few heads turned toward me. Someone at the back gasped. Another shifted in their seat. Paul, one of Brad's drinking buddies from college, nodded slowly, his mouth full of cookie. I didn't speak, just stared at the tablecloth, tracing the cheap diamond pattern with a fingernail. The checkbook pressed against my ribs inside the fleece. Then the blow came. Paul said, too loud to be casual. He said, "Garage is locked now. Just in case." Tessa added, voice smooth as syrup. She said, "We'll sort donations soon. But no reason to go through personal things, Mike. You understand." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. A metallic aftertaste clung to the back of my tongue. I nodded once. The chair clicked again, wobbled under my weight like it didn't want me there either. I remembered the garage. Last winter. Snow drifting in sideways through the half-open door. Dad in his flannel shirt, his breath fogging up his glasses. He'd held the checkbook then, tapped it lightly with his thumb. He said, "I hate fighting after death. You'll know what's yours." Then he'd nodded toward the old shelf, the one with the busted bracket. Something had been taped underneath. I hadn't thought about it until now. Someone laughed near the dessert tray. It felt like it was aimed at me, though it probably wasn't. Brad leaned in close to someone. Maybe Paul, maybe one of the cousins. I caught a fragment. He said, "There's more Mike won't like. But he'll find out soon." New stakes. I wasn't just being cut from a will. I was being erased. From memory. From worth. I stayed until the end. Helped fold tables. Carried a trash bag out to the dumpster behind the church. No one said thank you. As I walked to the parking lot, I passed Tessa. She didn't even flinch. In the truck, I sat for a long time. Windows fogging. My breath steady. Then I opened the checkbook. Inside, between two blank checks, was a folded receipt. Speedway. 2 weeks before he died. Timestamp, 7:42 p.m. On the back, in Dad's handwriting, blocky, slanted to the left. Key is still under the shelf. I stared at the words. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. The old leather squeaked under my grip. Engine turned once, twice, then caught. I pulled out of the church lot as the organ died behind me. Next stop wasn't home. It was the garage. And the shelf. The drizzle had turned the church parking lot into a mirror. My boots left wet halos on the blacktop. The old Ford idled beside me, headlights off, windshield streaked from wipers that needed replacing a year ago. I leaned against the door, arms folded, listening to WMVX humming from someone else's rolled-down window. Bobby Vinton. Blue Velvet. Fitting. The air smelled like damp asphalt, wet grass, and the faint sour note of cigarettes smoked in a hurry. A yellow security light buzzed overhead, flickering every third second like a dying firefly. I heard the knock before I saw her. One rap, knuckle to glass. I turned. Ruth stood just outside the beam of light, her Kroger bag pressed to her chest. A Walmart hoodie covered her scrubs, sleeves rolled halfway. The same shoes she wore when she helped Dad up the stairs. I rolled the window halfway. Rain tapped against the door edge. She said, "You're still here." I replied, "Didn't feel like rushing." She looked down at the bag in her hands, shifted weight from one foot to the other. She said, "He asked me to give you this. Told me if things got ugly." She handed it through the window. Inside was a folded receipt. Speedway. Coffee. Same day as the funeral. I unfolded it. Same timestamp. 7:42 p.m. I looked at her, then back at the receipt. My fingers tightened. She nodded toward her car. She said, "Come talk for a second." I shut off the engine, grabbed my thermos, and followed. Her old sedan sat parked under a flickering bulb. The paint had faded to chalk. Inside smelled like fast food and hospital antiseptic. She opened the glove box, pulled out a yellow sticky note. 3 letters. WPCU. Wright Pat Credit Union. She said, "He took me there once." Said the quiet one knew what he was doing. "That was you, right?" I didn't answer. I reached for my phone, swiped open the voice memos app. My thumb scrolled past receipts, reminders, junk recordings. Then I saw it. Garage 4/16. I tapped play. Dad's voice came through the phone, scratchy but clear. He said, "No court mess. These go straight to you, Mike." I stared at the phone. The screen dimmed to black. My thumb hovered. She said, "You okay?" I didn't answer. Rain slid down the back of my neck, soaked into the collar. The inside of my jacket clung to my shirt. I tasted stale peppermint from the gum in my pocket. I said, "They locked the garage." She smirked, just barely. She said, "Yeah? Then start checking what's not locked." I looked at her. For the first time that day, someone wasn't trying to shrink me. She said, "They treated you like a janitor today, but your dad didn't." A silence passed. The sodium lights hummed. She handed me the sticky note. She said, "Write Pat's where it starts. I don't know what's there, Mike, but he said you would." I nodded once. She turned toward the driver's side. The bag crinkled as she opened the door. Then she paused, looked back. She said, "They think you're too soft to look. Prove I'm wrong." Then she was gone. The taillights vanished into the fog. I stood there alone. Back in the truck, I pulled the checkbook from my jacket. It felt heavier now. I flipped it open. A small card slid out. Wright Pat Credit Union. Branch address. Local number. A hand-scrawled note. Ask for TOD records. Waffle House. Early morning. Booth near the window. Steam from coffee curled toward the ceiling. I sat alone, a cracked Fidelity login screen glowing from an old laptop. Waitress leaned over, eyebrows raised. She said, "Sir, are you okay?" I replied, "Yeah. Just reading the map before the road." Back in the truck, I stared through the windshield. Raindrops raced each other toward the wipers. My fingers tapped the steering wheel. The engine stuttered, then started. Wiper blades groaned across the glass. I pulled past a line of SUVs, Tessas, Brads, Pauls. All polished, all dry. Mine smelled like old coffee and sun-baked vinyl. The checkbook sat on the passenger seat, slightly open. Beneath it, barely visible in the dim light, something metallic caught my eye. I reached over, lifted the checkbook. There, taped to a folded gas receipt, was a small brass key. I stared at it. Didn't move. Didn't breathe. Then I whispered to no one. I said, "Okay, Dad. Let's see what they forgot to lock." The break room smelled like burnt popcorn and sweat. One of the new guys had left a burrito spinning in the microwave too long. I sat at the corner table, elbows on the fake wood grain, my gloves on the chair beside me. Greasy, still stinking of motor oil. The overhead light buzzed and flickered, just enough to make the headache pulse behind my eyes. Clock on the wall said 2:16 a.m. Somewhere past the pallet racks, a forklift beeped as it reversed. The night shift rolled on. I unlocked my phone. Cracked screen, no case, always running hot. Facebook loaded slow on our break room Wi-Fi. Took me a minute to realize what I was looking at. Brad had posted a photo of Dad's house. Front porch in the early light. No filter. Just a caption. Dad left us wisdom. Too bad some think money matters more. #legacy, #family values. I stared at it. He said, in the caption, some people took advantage. I replied, quietly, guess that's me now. I tapped screenshot. Saved it. Then forwarded it to my Gmail with a subject line, documentation. Just in case. Because that's what this was now. Not grief. Not closure. Documentation. I flipped over to Gmail. A notification popped up, auto-forward from my old inbox. Tessa had forgotten to remove me from one of the shared threads months ago. The system still piped things in. Subject line caught my eye. Urgent. Property concerns /M. Dalton. I opened it. Tessa to Dad's estate attorney. Dated yesterday. Marked urgent. She wrote, Mike has been emotionally unstable. I suggest we secure the house. Probate needs to move fast before confusion or claims delay the process. Emotionally unstable. Secure the house. They were laying the groundwork to box me out completely. The microwave beeped. I didn't move. By the time my shift ended, it was still dark out. I drove the back route past Dad's house. Slower than I meant to. Rain had stopped, but the streets still glistened under the streetlights. The house looked cold. Dark windows. The porch light kicked on as I passed. Motion sensor. On the garage, a new sign. No trespassing. Fresh white plastic. Bolted into the brick. I didn't stop. I turned into the speedway lot a mile down, the one by the closed-down Wendy's. Bought a black coffee and sat in the cab with the heat on low. The cup tasted like cardboard and chemicals. I unfolded Ruth's sticky note again. The one with WPCU circled twice in blue ink. I said to myself, it's not just the house anymore. It was structure. Intention. Hidden things Dad never put in the will. I drove home just before dawn. My duplex looked the same. Brick stained with mildew, porch light flickering, mailbox dented from the last ice storm. Inside, I flipped on the kitchen light. A yellow envelope sat on the counter. I must have brought it in half asleep before my shift. Return address, Lexington Pines HOA. Signed by Paul Whitaker. I opened it slowly. Paper dry and stiff, smelled like toner and cheap cologne. Dear Mr. Dalton, we've been informed of your attempts to access the property at 14 Hollowbrook. You are not listed as an authorized party. Further attempts will be treated as trespassing and reported. I read it twice. I said, they used my dad's death to file an HOA complaint. In my head, I heard Paul's voice from the buffet line that day. He said, mocking, Mike's not listed anywhere, is he? I crumpled the letter in my fist. My palms were sweating now. My face felt hot. I walked out to the truck, threw the letter on the passenger seat, and sat in silence. Glove box. I popped it open. Empty gum wrappers. Expired registration. 3 napkins from Speedway. No key. No folder. No note. Just clutter and lint. I said to myself, he didn't give it to me. Not directly. Right Pack Credit Union. A clerk held up a laminated form. Her nails were bright pink. She said, you're the pod recipient, but you'll need the key to access box 712. I stared at her. The checkbook was in my lap. My thumb gripped the corner, knuckles tight. Back in the truck, I reached for the checkbook again. Flipped it open. Pages were curling now from how many times I'd gone through them. No notes. No numbers. Just the receipt again. And then something shifted. As I dropped the HOA letter onto the passenger seat, it grazed the back cover of the checkbook, and something slipped loose. A soft metallic clink. I froze. Looked down. Between the last pages and the leather backing, wedged tight, was a small brass key. I pulled it out. Faded. Cold. A cracked plastic tag dangled from it, barely legible. But the black marker was still there. WPCU, 712. I stared at it for a long time. No breath. No movement. Just silence in the cab. Then I closed my fingers around the key. This wasn't about being listed. It was about what they hadn't found yet. The credit union smelled like old coffee and dust from plastic plants. A slow printer hummed behind the counter, spitting out something no one would read. A fluorescent light overhead buzzed just loud enough to press behind my eyes. My jacket dripped water onto the gray entry mat, leaving small black puddles around my boots. I stepped up to the counter, brass key in hand. Tag read, WPCU 712. The clerk looked young. Hair in a tight bun, nails painted lavender. She took the key, flipped through a worn paper log. She said, Box 712. Sign here. I signed. She slid a metal keyring across the counter. Stamped plastic tag, WPCU 712. No questions. No judgment. Just the next transaction. A courtroom. Judge's gavel slams once. Brad yells, That's forged. I place a stamped pod form on the desk. A lawyer mutters, Not forged. Notarized. The safe deposit room felt colder than outside. Metal walls, no sound. Just the weight of everything that came before this moment. I sat down at the tiny table. The box clunked as I placed it on the surface. The lining inside smelled like machine oil and cheap foam rubber. I opened it. A single plastic folder. Blue. Tabs in red. My fingers were numb. I opened the flap. Inside, pod confirmation from Wells Fargo, signed and dated. Todd deed stamped by the Montgomery County Recorder's Office. Fidelity Brokerage Beneficiary Form. My name typed clean across the top. Notarized letter from a bank manager. Real signature. Real stamp. A burned CD. Sharpie across the front. Cam footage 3/12. Pod day. I didn't breathe for a few seconds. He didn't just plan for this. He built a firewall. I took everything. 15 minutes later, I sat at the UPS store across from the Taco Bell strip mall. Dollar Tree's neon sign flickered behind me in the glass. Printer beeped. $0. 49 per page. The scanner jammed halfway through the brokerage form. I fixed it. Rescanned. Uploaded everything to a cloud folder I created that morning. Titled it, Dad Trust Proof. I backed it up to a USB drive, then again to my old Dell laptop in the truck. Folders labeled by hand. Legal/finance/deed/voice memo. Double copies. One offline. He gave me the weapon. I just had to use it. Back in the parking lot at work, I sat under the sodium orange light. Rain tapped against the windshield. Forklifts beeped in the background behind the loading dock. I made the call. Put the lawyer on speaker. Not the family's. I found this one myself. He said, wills can be challenged. But TOD or POD, they pass automatically. I said, even if there's a will? He said, doesn't matter. If it's recorded properly, the will isn't the gatekeeper anymore. I stared at the checkbook on the passenger seat. It was open to the Speedway receipt. The timestamp still circled in red. 7:42 p.m. That night. His last move. I gripped the wheel. The leather was cracked, rough under my palm. My coffee in the cup holder had gone cold hours ago. I drank it anyway. Later that night, I checked the county probate website from my phone during lunch. Tessa had filed a motion to assume control as executor. Brad had submitted an affidavit claiming family consensus. Family consensus. I said, that's fast. Too fast. They weren't wasting time. The window was closing. Whatever I had to use now. Same courtroom. Brad's attorney speaks. There was no communication from Mike at the time. The judge replies. He said, Mr. Dalton filed the non-probate notice 2 weeks prior. That stands. Brad's mouth opens, but nothing comes out. The timeline was everything. I wasn't behind anymore. I was ahead, but I knew how fast this could turn. Back at Walmart, I stood in the self-checkout line before my shift. Between customers buying cleaning spray and energy drinks, I fed the machine a few bills. The receipt printed slowly. $12. 75. Money order. Montgomery County probate filing. I folded it twice. Slid it into the checkbook. My thumb brushed the Speedway receipt again. Same timestamp. Same folded corner. Same smell, faint ink and heat. I didn't say a word, but the war had started. And this time, I wasn't playing defense. Brad's face lit my screen before the sun even came up. Instagram story. Posted just before 6 a.m. A photo of a Wells Fargo building, tinted orange like a movie poster. Legal pad on a desk in the foreground, scribbled with what looked like notes or doodles. Caption read, When people don't play fair, you lawyer up. Brain briefcase, hashtag real estate grind, hashtag family drama. I sat in my truck behind the Walmart loading dock. Forklifts beeped in reverse behind the warehouse. The sky was still black, but the cab glowed blue from my phone. He was moving fast. I said nothing. I opened Dad's laptop on the center console. Entered the old password. The same one taped under the drawer in his garage. It logged in slow. Fan already whirring like a plane engine. Fidelity page loaded. I pulled up the accounts tied to his name. There it was. Trustee, Mike Dalton. Control flag, active. Pending ID confirmation for withdrawals, enabled. I hovered for a second, then clicked. Freeze all withdrawals. Screen flashed. Request confirmed. Cold light hit my face. My hands trembled, just slightly. I stared at the confirmation screen like it might disappear. He wasn't going to drain this. Not today. I pulled up the email draft. To Brad's attorney, address copied from a thread Tessa had forwarded months ago, still sitting in my Gmail. I attached everything. Scan pods. Todd deed with recorder's stamp. Notarized bank letter. The burned CD video files. Subject line, estate assets. Non-probate, legal status notice. I wrote, all listed assets are held outside probate jurisdiction. Trustee authority verified. Please advise your client to cease misrepresentation of ownership or control. Further attempts to interfere will be escalated. I hit send. Then I made the call to the bank's legal department. Line clicked 3 times before someone picked up. She said, Right Pack Compliance Office. This is Kendra. I said, my name is Mike Dalton. I've just enacted a freeze on a trust account. There's family tension. I need the system to log everything. IP, timestamps, access. She said, already being tracked. Any irregular movement triggers compliance flags. Do you need physical documentation for court? I said, I'm building a folder. Just need the system to catch him if he moves. She said, then you're covered. Before I hung up, I hit record on my phone. Voice memo. Brad moves money fast. This slows him down. If he pushes, he's in breach. I let that hang in the silence. Later that morning, I drove out to Dad's place. The sign on the lawn had changed. Now it read, property secured. No entry. Owner-initiated patrols. The garage looked darker than usual. Porch light off. Windows shut. I parked at the edge of the driveway. Paul stood in the front yard. HOA vest zipped to the chin. Cheap neon. Arms folded. Plastic badge pinned to his chest. He said, you were warned, Mike. I made the call. I stepped out, camera in hand. I replied, it's a civil issue, not a break-in. He didn't move. Police cruiser pulled up a minute later. Local patrol. Same guy I'd seen at Speedway once or twice. Officer stepped out, radio crackling. He said, what's going on? I said, I'm the trustee. Not here to enter. Just taking inventory photos. Paul said nothing. The officer looked at the sign. Looked at me. Shrugged. He said, you're not breaking anything. Not my lane. Wind blew across the yard. My shoes crunched on driveway salt. The static from his radio buzzed, then cut off. I turned to go back to the truck. Paul's voice followed. He said, no matter what paper you wave, you'll never be what Brad is. I didn't answer, but my hand clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles cracked. Brad in court, sweating through his collar. Judge reads aloud. Unauthorized movement of funds while under freeze order. Brad's face turns the color of his tie. I slide the email chain across the table. No words. No expression. That moment's coming. But not yet. Back in my duplex, I opened my phone again. Checked the county court site. Tessa had sent a group text. Her message read, Mike, we're family. This is what Dad didn't want. Let's settle this fairly. Please. She attached a photo of the backyard. Dad's shed. The rose bush he planted before Mom got sick. It didn't work. Brad's second flip was already delayed. His third was still sitting in demo. He needed cash flow. And this estate had been his exit plan. Not anymore. That night, I stopped at the Speedway on Salem Avenue. Bought a bottle of water and 2 granola bars. Got back in the truck. Red light held me at the corner. My phone buzzed. Voicemail. Brad's lender. Then another notification. Text message. No name. Just a number I didn't recognize. Message read. Play games with our money, and you'll wish you hadn't. Balance scale. I took a screenshot. Forwarded it to my legal folder. No reply. No reaction. Just quiet. Then the light turned green. And I drove. The steel bench was cold beneath me, even through the denim. Wind whipped around the Montgomery County Courthouse like it was chasing something. A faded American flag snapped above the columns, edges frayed, sky behind it the color of dishwater. My coffee sat beside me on the bench, burnt, lukewarm, bitter as everything else that morning. I'd been there an hour, watching the front steps, watching the wind scrape dead leaves against the concrete. Then the black BMW pulled in, parked half up on the curb. Brad stepped out, buttoned his camel coat too fast, maroon tie slightly crooked. He didn't see me until he hit the steps. Then his jaw tightened. Inside the courtroom, the clerk would read, "Any filed objection shall activate Clause 5C, complete forfeiture of trust disbursement." Brad would turn pale. Tessa would whisper. She said, "We didn't know." But that was still an hour away. I opened the legal folder on my lap. 4 tabs. Pod. Todd. Voice memo. Wells. Inside, everything stamped, signed, sealed. Pod confirmation from Wells Fargo. Todd deed with the county recorder's mark. Threat transcripts. Notarized letter from Right Pat. I ran my fingers along the edge of a copy. The paper rough, corners curled slightly. Behind me, the courthouse vending machine clicked to life. Whir. Drop. Thud. I didn't look. I heard his shoes before I heard his voice. He said, "You froze everything. That's illegal." I didn't look up. I replied, "It's called trustee control." He said, "Dad didn't trust you with a toolbox, let alone the house." Tessa arrived a second later. Her hair was pulled back, but strands clung to her cheek. Makeup smudged beneath one eye. She looked tired. Or fake tired. I couldn't tell. She said, "This isn't what Dad wanted. We're his blood." I reached for my phone. Tapped a recording. Volume up. Dad's voice filled the marble hallway, scratchy but clear. He said, "Mike, I don't want them fighting over scraps. This skips court. You handle it." Tessa's lip trembled. Brad looked down for half a second, then clenched his jaw, as if that made him immune. I stood, folder in hand. Didn't say a word. Inside the courtroom, the carpet smelled like old paper and mold. The judge wore glasses that slid down his nose every few minutes. A bailiff yawned behind him, discreetly. The judge said, "Parties here for estate dispute. Mr. Dalton, please proceed." I walked forward. No folder. No bag. Just documents in hand. Wells Fargo pod forms. Todd deed with county seal. Notarized bank letter. Printed transcript of the voicemail threats. One page after another. Opposing counsel flipped through the stack, frowning. He said, "These aren't part of the probate filing." The judge didn't blink. He said, "That's correct, because they're non-probate assets." The lawyer turned to Brad. He said, "You filed an objection." Brad leaned in, whispered too loudly. He said, "What does that mean?" The judge cleared his throat, looked directly at him. He said, "It means Clause 5C is active." Tessa's breath caught. She stepped forward, voice cracking. She said, "This isn't what Dad meant. Mike manipulated him." I said nothing. The judge banged the gavel once. Not hard, not loud, but final. He said, "Objection noted. Trust forfeiture clause applies." The courtroom fell into the kind of silence that makes people fidget. Tessa sniffled. Brad muttered something under his breath, nothing worth repeating. The judge moved on. Waffle House. Dawn. Steam curled from my mug as the waitress poured another refill. My laptop, screen cracked at the corner, flickered to life. 529 college savings plan. Beneficiary, Tyler Dalton. I clicked Fund Account. Balance updated. I watched it until the screen went dim again. Back outside the courthouse, Brad followed me down the steps. His coat flapped in the wind. Face red now, like someone had turned up the temperature inside him but forgotten the heat outside. He said, "This isn't over." I replied, "For you it is." He stepped closer. Too close. He said, "You want to walk away clean? You better check your truck first." Then he turned. Walked off. I stood still. Rain starting again, just mist for now. Then, somewhere across the street, glass broke. A sharp chirp from a truck alarm. Mine. The final hearing was held in a side courtroom. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like flies. The carpet smelled of burnt coffee and old paper. Gallery half full. Curious neighbors, legal interns, 2 local reporters scribbling in notepads like something might go viral in Dayton. Brad and Tessa entered first. No designer suits. No heels. Just gray coats and downcast eyes. They sat stiff, side by side, hands folded like altar boys waiting to lie. I walked in last. Faded Walmart jacket zipped to the collar. Work boots. Leather checkbook in one hand. Folder in the other. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. A white Habitat for Humanity truck backed into Dad's old driveway. Garage doors open. Workers loading saws, clamps, boxes of rusted nails. I signed a clipboard. Voiceover. Dad didn't leave me things. He left me work. I knew what to do with both. Back in the courtroom, the judge adjusted his glasses. He said, "Mr. Dalton, you may proceed." I stepped to the table. Set the folder down. I said, "As successor trustee, I've executed the documents provided. Exhibit 7 shows the final transfer confirmations." He nodded. I placed 2 letters in front of him. First, the closing notice from the trust's account. Second, a confirmation from Ohio's 529 College Advantage Plan. He skimmed them both. Passed them to the clerk. He said, "Based on prior filings and today's admissions, the trust stands." Mr. Dalton acted within his rights. Objection filings have activated the forfeiture clause. Brad leaned forward too fast. He said, "We were misled. There was no communication." I didn't look at him. I replied, "You were too busy posting tributes to see what mattered." Tessa's hands shook. Her voice broke mid-sentence. She said, "We're his family." I turned slightly. I said, "So was his caregiver. She got more respect than any of you." The room fell silent, except for the hum of the exit sign overhead. The judge looked down at his docket, bored now. He said, "This matter is concluded." The gavel struck once. They flinched. I didn't. Outside, the cold air cut through my sleeves. Reporters moved toward Brad. He kept his head down, ignored the questions, pushed past the cameras. Tessa followed, sunglasses on despite the cloud cover. No one looked at me. That was fine. I walked past the news van, down the sidewalk, toward the same F-150 they tried to humiliate me in front of weeks ago. The leather checkbook creaked as I opened it. Inside, the Speedway receipt. Still 7:42 p.m. Still folded clean. Still mine. I sat in the driver's seat. Signed 2 checks, slowly. $8,764. 91 to the rehab facility that kept Ruth on payroll until Dad's last breath. $25,000 to the Ohio 529 College Plan. Beneficiary, Tyler Dalton. 1 year later, Tyler stepped out of the financial aid office at Sinclair Community College. Manila folder in hand. Light snow falling. The counselor behind him said. She said, "Whoever set that up, it's airtight. You're all set." He didn't speak. He looked at a photo on his phone. Young me and Dad in the garage, both smiling under a rack of clamps. No words. Just the sound of quiet footsteps in fresh snow. Back in the truck, I tucked the Speedway receipt back into the checkbook. Then closed the cover for the last time. Soft leather. Familiar snap. No ceremony. No applause. Just clarity. Later that afternoon, I drove to Dad's house one last time. It was empty now. The door creaked on the way in. The garage was colder than I remembered. Dust hung in the air like memory. Empty pegboards. The faint smell of oil and sawdust. I walked to the old drawer. Opened it. Placed the checkbook under a folded towel. Closed it gently. Locked it. Then I set the key on the counter. I walked out. Pulled the door shut behind me. Didn't turn back. A locksmith stood at the curb, hands in his jacket. He said, "They won't need this anymore." I replied, "No, but someone else might." He said, "What happens to the tools?" I said, "They're getting picked up. Dad wanted them used." Behind us, the white truck rolled in. One worker lifted a box from the porch. He said, "Who was he?" The other shrugged. He said, "Quiet guy? Took care of business." Garage doors open wide. Light floods the room. Subscribe if you want more stories about real men who don't scream. They act. Coldly. To the end.